Imagine this. Your thoughts, your beliefs, your feelings. This is your house. But is it your home? Hi, I'm Nelson DeMello, and join me as we try to find our home beyond our borders.
I don't know. I think that's fine.
Yeah, that's a good take.
Last time we talked about, we ended up talking about deciding whether or not you're going to stay with a person. If you made that decision, that's awesome. If you've already made that decision, I'm saying that's awesome. If you're in the process of making that decision, I'm praying for you. But now we're going to talk about the Day of Atonement. So this is a special day. This is in Leviticus 16. It's the high point of the book, right? So there's two goats here, one sacrificed, one sent away, and there's a scapegoat, okay? This symbolizes the removal of guilt. They just kind of just let one goat go, and the other one just takes the beating. The spiritual weight of all sin just fall on this goat, and it's game over. This thing is demolished, destroyed. Jesus here is both goats. So yeah, he satisfies wrath and removes sin. Oh, okay, now I remember. Sorry. One goat takes all the wrath, right? That's sacrifice, burnt, boom. Okay. And then the other one carries the sin and leaves with the sin. So it stays clean. That's a scapegoat, literally. Okay. So in Jesus is both. He takes on the wrath and he removes the sin from the peoples. This is the one day a year that the high priest enters the holiest of holies, and they would put bells around them just in case they don't make it, to be honest. Yeah, it's intense. So they would go in the holiest of holies. If they weren't completely pure, completely clean, they would drop dead. The bells would stop sounding, right? Because they would have little bells as they moved. If they didn't hear anything, they just pulled them out. And that's how it was. That's intense. Good news is, in the Gospels, the veil that separates the holiest of holies from the holy place, right, where once a year only the high priest would go, that veil was torn into two when Jesus died on the cross. And this signifies that because God's presence, his actual presence, was in the holiest of holies, and it would seep through you do the math, how hard people feel the spirit, but God's true presence is only in this little veiled place. Point is, the veil is torn, and he is now, with his full presence, free to roam. That's powerful. And again, it points to Jesus being more than just a teacher, more than just some guru, more than just something. There is something that is symbolically true about who he is and him as God. If the veil tears as he dies, no one tore it. It just tore itself, just ripped in half as he died, as his body tore. The veils tore. Wow. More imagery. So Leviticus 17 through 20, it's about moral holiness and God's nearness, right? It talks about blood being a life force. It's central to worship, and then talks about centralized worship and not having your homemade altars and stuff like that. But life being in the blood, I think this is such an interesting thing. So blood is sacred. It's the currency of atonement. And this obviously goes back to Jesus's blood being like the sacrifice, and why our new covenant is with wine that represents the blood. There's this contradiction that it's not a contradiction, but I struggled with for a second there. There's this thing about a man having a sex with a woman that is on her period. The sole difference is whether they know it or not. So if they have sex, and it starts their period, if they don't know, right, then it's fine. They're just unclean. It's whatever, not a sin or anything. But if the guy knows and he's being creepy about it and he does it intentionally, that's blasphemous. That's stone him to death kind of deal. So yeah, that's interesting. And I was like, what? Why is that? it's like it's still a covenant, they're still married and it's still between them, and there's nothing weird about it and nothing wrong. But I think from what I understand, it's because blood is so precious and so sacred. It's this life-giving act mixed with her life force leaving her. I don't know. It's some weird thing. There's also might be ties to like other religious rituals of that being the case. So it's just context. Maybe to a modern, Western person, like that doesn't make sense. But at the time, it was like, yeah, no, that makes sense because. I mean, same with like child sacrifices. Like, why do you even have to mention child sacrifices? Well, it's because literally all their neighboring countries were just sacrificing children. It's the whole like throwing a virgin down a volcano to appease the gods. Well, in the Near East, yeah, in the Near East, that's kind of what they did. They just sacrificed their firstborns. Yeah. So, chapter 18. This is where things get dicey. This is where you're going to hate me. It's where I'm going to hate me because I'm not going to do well. I'm not going to give it justice to the argument. But here we have, I think it's also fair to put into context, again, out of like the 18 rules about sexual misconduct, 2 of them are homosexuality, right? Most of them are about bestiality. Well, no, really it's about incest. Like, let's say 15 out of the 18 is incest, and then 1 is about bestiality and 2 is about homosexuality. And so, again, this idea that, why do they have to focus on the gays and this and that? No, not necessarily. That is like a thing that is condemned, but it's almost like proportionate, right? Like I think they say 5% of the population is LGBTQ. So like out of 20, for there to be 1 law about homosexuality, like kind of makes sense. The majority are straight, and so they need the most rules. And it's like you can't. Basically, it's like incest goes to the cousins. Like that's kind of how it's put here, right? You can't be with your half sister, can't be with your mom, your dad, you can't be with your uncle's wife because she's your aunt. So even like extended family to a point is still family, just stuff like that. It's like, bro, the circle that is 1 removed from you, 2 removed from you, don't even bother, right? So there's that. Within incest, it's not just cultural. These practices spiritually defile the land. Okay. Homosexuality, it's not simply about orientation, but it is a disordered desire that blocks nearness. Now, if anyone here is listening that is gay, bi, whatever you identify as and whatever you desire, it's a complicated and tough topic. Obviously, because it's heartfelt and you're passionate. And honestly, I'm passionate. Why am I passionate? I'm passionate because the way I see my life and what I love, who I love, I didn't get to decide, right? Like I feel that I didn't get to decide. And so that argument of I didn't get to decide, I feel for that. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I wish I wish I wasn't an artist, or I wish I didn't have creative endeavors. Life would be simpler. Life would be easier if I just had an accounting job and I just did that. And, but no, that every time I do that, I get depressed. I get anxious. I get sad. I don't know what to do with myself except for go back to the things that I love and this and that. The distinction. There's a redemption and reorientation of what happened in me about my art, right? So what happened? My art used to define me in the sense that if I painted a picture, this would be who I was on the inside, right? Like this, if this was the expression, if this was like my insides, my soul trying to come out of me and be put on paper, then this is my soul. This is the deepest part of who I am. And this is me. My art is who I am. This is how I used to think and used to feel. And I think God reoriented me to understand that this is an extension of me. It's not who I am. Meaning that whatever is going on in here, my art is going to reflect that. But the art, again, the art is a reflection. If I grew out my hair, like I am me, my reflection is not me. Right? So if I change me, my reflection will also change. What does that mean? it means that, one, my art doesn't define me, like I've talked about back and forth, and it doesn't give me any value, and it doesn't anchor me, and it doesn't do anything. It's just an extension of me. The same way that when people work, it's just a job. Art, as important as it is, and as much as like I'm compelled to do it, it's in that sense, it's just a job. Yeah, it's satisfying, it fulfills me and this and that, but it's just a job. Like it's nothing more. It can't be anything more. It can't be like my purpose, my identity, no, like that's not what work is for, right? Okay, you're thinking, okay, yeah, I get it. Work, and people are different though. But people might love, but that's the same thing. People are just people. And we can't allow for people to define. Nothing can define you except for God, essentially. And so, like, I know the New Testament argument. I say New Testament argument when we look at Romans 1 and we see what brings about homosexuality. There's nothing in the Bible that indicates that you're born that way. But it doesn't mean that it's as simple as a choice. And it's not that simple. And anyone who thinks that is just ignorant, because like they don't see their own sexuality, right? Like, I didn't choose the type of women that I find attractive. That's been molded by maybe culture, that's been molded by a lot of things. And something that I've even like gotten deeper into as I'm exploring that. A part of my attraction is trying to make people envious. So it's like I'm attracted to someone that other people would be attracted to. There is a sense of that. And you're like, dude, that's disgusting. And da. What I'm saying is these inner mechanisms that I'm talking about, like it's all of us. I'm just not scared to be open and be real about it, but it's going on in you. And that's kind of the deal. Like me being so bluntly honest with myself to like find these things and understand these things helps me understand other people. You can pretend and hide behind a screen all you want, but like you're just as crooked and evil. Me having it exposed relinquishes its power. It doesn't have to be about that anymore for me because it's out in the open. Sorry, yeah, I guess that was just my complex of like, I'm better than you, but I'm not. My point is that there is such a complex, deep soul dysmorphia of what goes on that expresses itself in sexuality. And that's kind of what the Bible talks about. Now, there's two different solutions here, right? And at the same time, poetically, it's the same. And it's death to yourself. So in the Christian sense, you die to yourself, you are born again, and you are a new creation. Well, in the Old Testament, you just die. Yeah, sorry. So yeah, that went from deep to kind of abruptly funny. But I mean, that's essentially what it is. Like, science doesn't say you're born that way. And yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. Like, I know there were some papers that were released, Harvard, saying that you were born that way. Well, they redacted it, and that wasn't a big deal. And so now public perception, or at least there's a group of people that believe that they were born that way because science says so, and they had to take it back because the science was off, and it's not true. So we're back at we don't know, right? But if we understand this both and thing, and essentially, like, yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe this is just to educate, cisgendered heterosexual people that aren't updated on the science or whatever the case is. I'm going to compare it to other things just simply for psychological category and there's no moral value in what I'm comparing, right? But like alcoholism, for example, you can be born with the proclivity, being prone to being addicted, right? These are a combination of genes that puts that in your repertoire of possible things that can happen to you. In the same sense, homosexuality is the same way, where there's no gay gene. Like, oh, this gene, whether, you can turn it off, turn it on, and you're either gay or not. No, it's a combination of, we're all a soup of character traits and possibilities and all these things. Some people have a greater chance and possibility of having it, and their environment kind of boosts it and like awakens it, right? And so it's a function of that. And I mean, I think the same is with like ADHD and just stuff like that, where like, yeah, you're born different than the next guy, and I'm not that. So I mean, that brings into a picture a lot of things. One, you can't make someone gay. Like, you can't pass that on. Okay, that's like one of the most dangerous misconceptions. Like, you can't just make someone gay, but they're also not born that way. So it's something in between of like, how would you say it? It's like a weakness. It's not a weakness in a bad sense. It's like, it's the way some people have a sweet tooth. Okay, that's actually a perfect example. Some people have a sweet tooth. Some people are just sweet-footed. You know what I mean? No, but like, you got a sweet tooth. You're always gonna have to check yourself and watch yourself and see how much sugar you're eating and the chocolate. Like, you can't help yourself. That's what you love. But there's like this dance of self-control and like, and you can't make other people sweet tooth. Like, my wife has a sweet tooth. I don't like sweets. She can bake the best things ever. I can try them and still be like, that's too sweet, or I've had enough, and she's like, what? That's crazy. You only had 2 bites. And I'm like, yeah, that's all I really needed. Being gay is the same way. It's like, you can't force anyone. You can't persuade anyone to do it. And it's also a tug. There's this tug maybe from, as you were born or whatever the case is, but it's not like, there's like this evolution to it and this acceptance, right? Well, at least when we're looking here, we have to, again, understand. If we understand that the rest of the laws are preservation, if we understand that the rest of the laws are about protecting you spiritually, emotionally, physically, another aspect of sexuality in general, it's the only sin that you sin against yourself, right? And if we see ourselves, and like after that, it talks about how we are holy temples. Imagine allowing strangers into your temple with no reverence, no regard for the temple, and they desecrate and they do whatever they want. They do graffiti, they steal stuff inside your temple, they whatever the case is, and leave. Like that's one aspect. Oh my gosh, yeah. I'm sorry I'm all over the place, but the other aspect is just the spiritual, emotional consequence and the projection that we put onto sex, and how emotionally and spiritually charged sex is. That has to like enter our brains. It's not just sex. I know porn stars say it and people say it. In my past, in my history, I had plenty of people say that. All of them essentially lied. I haven't really met people. It's a connective force. It's a connective energy like that. That's just not something to mess around with, play around with. If it's the case that it is spiritual, emotional, psychological, and not just physical, then God might just have good reason to stop us from that. And again, 15:2, there's way more confinement, which I get it. It's like, great. The law confines you from sleeping with 5% of everyone you could want to sleep with or whatever. But for a gay man, that's all of them. There's no way around it. I know people try to do the whole Greek interpretation, the rape interpretation, it's too much gymnastics, man. It's too much gymnastics. It's not at all what it's saying. It's just this thing of, are you his people or are you not? Are you going to trust in his sovereignty and his care? Are you going to trust that he's going to take care of you or not? And like, again, this is a word for a Christian. I mean, it's funny. It's like the church that I go to, the pastor makes a serious point about tithing being like, hey, if you're not a member, this word is not for you. This is for the people who, agree with what we do, are on board with the mission, and understand the teachings of tithing, right? And in the same sense, I'm not homophobic. I don't care that much, like on the earthly realm. I don't know, like just in day-to-day life, like, live your life, whatever. But calling yourself a Christian and keeping your sexuality, like we all have to submit our sexuality, whether you're straight or not. You have to submit your sexuality. You have to submit your money, your plans, your finances. Like everything needs to be submitted to God. That is what being a Christian is. And like, I think it's ridiculous for a Christian that's unsubmissive in their tongue, in their mind, in their heart, in all of these things, to look at a gay man and say, hey, you're not submitting. You're not you're gay and that's wrong. Dude, when you're completely submitted, one, you understand how hard and how complicated and how like gut-wrenching that is. You have way more compassion for people who just can't do it. That's kind of where I'm at. I know how tough it is to submit. Sometimes I don't want to. I do it out of trust, out of obedience, out of knowing, like, again, it's that history that I have with Jesus. It's just like, I can't deny his goodness. And so I know if God wants something from me, I got to give it to him. And there's like a pleasure, there's like a bittersweet pleasure to it because I know that there's something better in store for me. But you have to know that for yourself before you can give that up. And I totally understand that. And I totally welcome and accept that. So yeah, I mean, look, what the Bible says is what the Bible says, but you don't have to get your stuff together to worship God. You can, where you are right now, do that. We'll stop here, man. I gotta stop at the heavy parts, man, because we need a reset. So, or maybe I'll just kind of cut into the next thing. But God bless you, and I just pray for you. If you're making that decision, if this touched your heart, or even if you're straight and you just need to have compassion for the LGBTQ community, like, yeah, I mean, took you long enough. I don't know. I'm just kidding, man. But yeah, okay. Y'all have a great day. See y'all. Psych! I gotta keep going because we just got too much to cover. And yeah, I don't know. I don't want to stop there. Or maybe I do want to stop there. I don't know. We'll see. Ethical holiness. This is where we get in chapter 19, verse 2. Be holy, for I am holy. Jesus quotes that. This includes justice for the poor. This is honest business. This is no partiality, right? This is a general justice for everyone. This protects specifically marginalized people, but also this allows for the story of Ruth, right? Verse 19:10 talks about how you don't glean to the edges. You allow the edges for poor people and foreigners to come in and still get something to eat and take care of themselves, which, again, an act of mercy, guys. So there is that sense that there is a goodness in taking care of everyone and everything. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is verse 19:18, chapter 19, verse 18, right? Quoted by Jesus in Matthew 22. Again, for people who are like, oh, this is the God of wrath and destruction and da-da-da, and Jesus quoting Old Testament, man. He's the extension. This is the Word, and the Word became flesh. That's all it is, right? And so we see that connection. We have to see that connection. In regards to punishments, right? In chapter 20, people are executed for child sacrifices, adultery, bestiality, homosexuality, cut off from the people. There's different kinds of punishment, right? So there is execution, there's cut off from people, and then there is God turning his face towards them or toward away from. So there's basically, you get either stoned publicly, you either get kicked out of the community, or God deals with you by himself. And I think, I had a list breaking this down. I wonder if I have it here. I don't. But just basically how it kind of works. And I think that the common thread is if you're doing something that corrupts the community, and like adultery, bestiality, where we'll get into it later, what the other Near Eastern empires were doing. But like child sacrifices, bestiality, like these were religious things that other people were doing. And I guess for some reason it was enticing to do. Like when one person did it, they're like, oh, that sounds like fun. I'm going to do that too. I'm going to kill my son too. Anyways, so that kind of cultural corruption would be put to death, stoned, like it's not going anywhere. I don't remember. There are certain things, even morally, that you would just be cast out for. And then certain things that were like, it didn't harm anyone, it didn't affect anyone, but God still deemed as defilement, he would take care of you himself. That sounds ominous. Okay, so let's look at some categories of what's going on, what the ancient cultures around, right? Egyptian, Canaanite, Mesopotamian cultures were doing, and then what Leviticus tells Israel to do. And so in regards to sacrifices often involved manipulation of gods, including child sacrifices, temple prostitution, or feeding the gods, right? Manipulation of gods is like, hey, I sacrifice my child, give me a beautiful lineage, or, give me power, give me, manipulating, like in terms of like turning the face of the gods, getting their way with the gods, right? And then in Leviticus / Israel, sacrifices in Leviticus are relational and symbolic. No manipulation, just atonement and communion with a holy God. So you couldn't earn God's favor with sacrifices. You already had his favor. It's more about cleaning yourself and being pure, right? But you couldn't, like, even vows, when you gave a sacrifice after the vow or promising something, it's like if you only held up your end of the deal, I guess, like shaving your head after a vow is done. You would only do that once it happened or whatever. But you didn't like earn that from God. The size of your vow didn't change how fast you were going to get it or whatever the case. It happened or didn't happen, and then you would complete your vows. Human value, right? So human life, for the Canaanites, Egyptians, Mesopotamians, was often expendable. Slaves, women, children were property. Child sacrifices was practiced. In Leviticus, it explains that every person bears God's image. Laws protected the poor, women, servants, and foreigners. You can look at Leviticus 19:9 through 18, 25:35 through 46. Sexual ethics. Pagan practices included incest, bestiality, rape, and ritual prostitution as forms of worship. And in Leviticus 18 through 20, calls for sexual purity, not just for health, but to preserve the sanctity of human bodies and relationships. Clean and unclean laws. Purity in other cultures were often superstitious or involved mutilation, magic, and appeasement. Levitical laws taught that sin and death corrupt, but cleansing and restoration are possible through God's mercy and order. Leadership and priests. Priests in pagan nations were often corrupt, elite, and mystical intermediaries who exploited people. Israel's priests were held to a higher standard, symbolizing God's holiness and designed to serve, not exploit. Now, were there high priests and priests that exploited? Yes. We'll read some stories in like 1 Samuel. They actually die. They get punished by God. And we see that, right? The fire, the strange fire, them being consumed entirely. There's this, I think it's with atonement, burnt offering, something like that. The priests had to pay the highest price if they sinned. The price was a male bull, and it's the equivalent to if the congregation allowed a sin to continue. So if a congregation was like, oh yeah, we can let this sin go by, or was ignorant to it, negligent to it, whatever the case was, and then repent, the whole congregation offers a bull. If the priest does something, just one person do the same thing, they were to offer a male bull. And then it's leaders and then common people, like, individual common people. And the sacrifice gets lower and lower. Leviticus 21 and 22, holiness of the priests, priestly standard, right? No contact with dead bodies, no disfigured priests in sacred service. It's not about worth, right? So this is something that like I also kind of struggle with. It's like, dude, it's a weird thing. I mean, like, being a priest, is that the highest honor ever? And if that's the highest honor, then yeah, I think it would be, how would you say, it takes away the dignity of anyone with any kind of mental disabilities, physical disabilities, right? Whether it's birth defects or crippling, like whatever the case is, for them to not be able to serve. Now, if this is just a role, like I said, it's just a job. This doesn't define anything. This doesn't prove anything. This doesn't whatever. It just needs to be done. And it needs to be done by a male because it's a symbolic thing of worship that points to something greater. Then does it rob dignity from anyone? For example, eunuchs or someone like explicitly, if their nuts get crushed, like they can't serve as a priest. and they can't go into the holies of holies. Does this take away their dignity? Does that rob their worth? That's the tension that I had, but maybe it's just a symbolic thing, and that's all that it is, even though I'm like, I don't know if that's good enough of an answer for me. We're Christian. When when Philip talks to the eunuch and he like breaks down the gospel, the eunuch knows the Old Testament. He knows that he's not allowed in the holiest of holies. And the gospel has to include that, hey, God is within you. Like, you are now the holiest of holies because God dwells inside of you. That has to restore dignity, right? And it has to restore, I'm chosen, I'm special, I'm seen by God, right? That thing. And oh my gosh, that gives me chills a little bit. I love, because I mean, there's so many people, man. In the soccer chat, there's this girl that wanted to play, and she's like really good, bro. It still just bothers me to this day. She's really good. She showed up on one of our days that we play futsal, and she just wrecked everybody. And I was like, bro, if she comes next week, I want her on my team. Like, we're gonna destroy everybody. And she didn't show up or anything, but then she randomly was like, hey, can I show up on a Saturday with y'all? And some guy was like, nah, sorry, girls can't play. And I spoke up. I was like, nah, that's BS, bro. She's heat, bro. She's fire. She's so good. And he's like, no, it's not about skill, man. I know girls can be good. And I'm thinking like, well, it's not about physicality. It can't be about physicality because it's like a bunch of dads, a bunch of kids like playing together. And, we all work the next day. It's like, we're not pros. This isn't serious. It's not like, you know what I mean? Like, no one's watching. We're just playing. We're just having fun. So it's like, it's not about physicality. It's not about skill. And if both of those things, I would understand if that were the case. But she's good at playing soccer, and no one's going to play rough, And like, I just saw that just rob her dignity. And I was like, there's no freaking way, bro. Like, how could you take that from her? Like, so just things like that just really, really get to me, bro. And so that's why, I mean, maybe this is a confession, I don't know, but like, that's why I have struggle with this, and why, it's just symbolic. It is what it is, isn't enough for me. But I couldn't find a better answer, I guess. And so that's kind of where I am at in limbo of just trying to understand, like, why can't crippled people serve? And like, I don't know, maybe the depth of the symbology has to really get into me, because like, the sacrifices couldn't have blemishes, right? The priests couldn't have blemishes. Like, maybe it just does speak to the fact that God is holy and he's set apart and he's flawless, and anything that's not flawless, I don't know, maybe it's like the raw power. Like, it's like putting a fork in an outlet versus a taser. I don't know. I don't know if that's what I mean, but like, just raw power, tapping raw power is going to destroy something. But if that can be softened, I don't know. I guess it's greater awe, the fact that the presence of God, this God, that anything remotely disfigured gets completely destroyed, that God lives inside of me with my mess and my complexity and all of that. And it doesn't react to that in the sense of destruction. That's the reframing that I'm talking about. Is like, sometimes we just look at the negative as negative, but there's the other side of that, where now that force of holiness and purity and destruction can live inside of me. And that puts awe and fear in my heart. Not fear in the sense that I'll be destroyed, because that's like just not mathematically possible anymore. But that is in me, and that is of who I am. So there's that spin, right? The positive spin, because it is all about perspective. I got to keep going. And so we get to slavery, right? There's a lot on slavery. Oh my goodness. Dude, I am not close to being finished, but I'm going to try. Okay, so slavery, there is a difference between Hebrews losing their property, being bad with their money, going broke, and being an indentured servant. Totally different than if somebody buys, an Egyptian slave or whatever the case is. Now, the mere fact that they're mentioned in law, again, preserves them. It gives them dignity. It gives them a safety net. It gives them, how would I say, just like a shield, right? There's also the sense that, dang it, what's the word? You do this with drugs. You do this with like abortion. It's a no, it's not pre. No freaking way, dude. Regulated. Oh my gosh. Okay, regulated. The fact that slavery is regulated speaks volumes to what was going on around them, right? Just that mere fact that it's regulated. Now, did Hebrew slaves have more rights? Yeah. Did they, it was like they usually gave themselves up to some rich guy down the street. And so they would just go back to their family. It was indentured servitude, just working, And what that meant also is every 6 years, there was the sabbatical year. A sabbatical year. Can you imagine that? The whole country takes a sabbatical year where they let the land restore. They let the animals, just do whatever they want. They would relax. The land, everything, hard reset. And then every 49 years, and debts were reset every 7 years. That's like mind-boggling, okay? Bought slaves didn't apply to them, right? So if you're an indentured servant, you basically you would just be redeemed, I guess. On the 7th year, you would just kind of like your debt would be clean. You would just start over. So that's crazy cool and this and that, and that's like absolutely revolutionary. But here, people would more criticize the slaves. Here's the deal. Not everyone owned slaves, one, and that doesn't mean anything. But it was like the average for like people who really owned slaves was 2 to 5, and it was household things, like helper. It's just, there was a huge disconnect from modern day slavery, or not modern day slavery, but transatlantic slavery was not anything near what the New Testament had to deal with, and definitely not what the Old Testament had to deal with. There is this ethical concern of, okay, so they're not allowed to rob someone and steal them, right? Like I can't just pull someone out of a random country, rob them and steal and then sell them to someone. That's an abomination. They would die. Cool. Again, rules, right, to slavery. But they can buy someone that might have been stolen in their own land, right? And they don't look twice. Now, to me, it becomes a lesser of two evils. It does, right? Because like you're getting robbed, you're going to be sold anyways, right? I would rather be sold to people who care and have like laws that institute human dignity than to be sold to some other barbaric. And again, when I say barbaric, I don't mean like there's a bunch of Neanderthals. I mean just like vicious, violent people. Who would you choose, right? I might have mentioned it already, but this whole thing of, the Bible condones it. And then my argument would be in the heart of what Jesus said, right? Because of the hardness of your hearts. But in the beginning, it was not so. It's like where you are in life, God's going to give you a perimeter. I think of Nyla. She used to be an OnlyFans person, super rich or whatever. What God has convicted her of, her transition, it's not on paper like textbook. You know what I mean? There was a transitional period. There was certain convictions that she had. There were certain things that she had to do, that she knew she had to do. But that was like on base with maybe her church, her pastors, God, right? Like what they thought was wise for her, what they thought was, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like we're all different. We all have struggles. We all come from different backgrounds, and God's going to meet us where we're at. And I think that's the heart of it is God met Israel where they were, in the context and where they were, in the cultures surrounding where they were. And one thing that I think about a lot, well, I have been thinking about a lot, is this idea that when this is only for people who are trying to sanctify themselves and live in obedience, because I mean outside of Christianity this concept is so foreign to you because you just do what you want, right? But to a Christian who's after obedience and sanctification and holiness, we become let's say conflicted, right? The word is conviction, but there's this conflict in you that comes from a place of, hey, you're more than this, you're better than this, versus this is still what I want. Usually when you have that feeling, it's a sign that you're ready to give it up. You just have to work on giving it up. And what that means is like, whether you relinquish it constantly, right? You talk about it, you open up, you just get your mind, your heart used to the idea that that's not yours anymore. But sometimes like other people impose their convictions on you. Have you ever tried to live by someone else's convictions? How emotionally exhausting that is, physically exhausting. Well, dude, the first thing that's crazy. I'm thinking about gay people that are just preached at their whole life, and they have the guilt, they have the honestly, it's condemnation, right? Because again, it's so deep into their core, so deep in their soul, and they're not ready to give that up yet. They're not at that place of like satisfaction and like wholeness with God to be like, oh yeah, I don't need love, and love can come however you decide, God. You know, they're just not at that place. That takes a long time, dude. Like, especially, I don't know, in a culture that just believes that love is supreme, like for you to allow God to define what love is, that's like the last thing on the list, you know? The first thing is like managing money and telling the truth and I don't know, just like simple elementary things, right? But going back, it's like living by someone else's convictions. It builds resentment, bitterness, anger, like all of these things, because you don't have the power to get there yet. And maybe you do agree. Yeah, that's the right thing. Sure. But I can't. I don't have it in me. You can only have that narrative. I mean, maybe not, but this is a common narrative that happens with young Christians with no discipleship or poor discipleship. My point is that God's plan was, hey, no slaves, women are equal in dignity and all these things. And that's what you get in the New Testament, but it had to start somewhere, you know? And I think even though the Levitical laws for Jews, right, it's the governing laws of Israel, somehow it seeped into human consciousness and it's evolved human consciousness. I do believe it. The sole reason that we've evolved as far as we have, if we have evolved ethically and morally and psychologically, emotionally, whatever the case is, solely due to the Old Testament and the New Testament. But it's the Bible, you know. The Old Testament precedes the New, so it goes together. I can't see it any other way. And I know the arguments, and yeah, you look at it at face value and you're like, yeah, that's rough. But if you understand what was going on around the time, and then again, that context, it changes everything. And then there's the festivals, right? The Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Feast of Weeks, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, Feast of Tabernacles, right? Just different days throughout the week or the month or the year, I should say. And then you got tabernacle stuff, continuous flame. There was some blasphemy going on in chapter 24, verse 16, and he died right there. I think he was stoned to death. Words matter, guys. Words matter. Again, sabbatical and jubilee years, blessings and curses, dedications. This is interesting. There's like almost this parallel to the curses of Israel and the curses of Cain. I don't know, go look it up. So basically, you have restless and wandering, ground withholding its yields, separation from God's presence and withdrawal from God's favor, fear and paranoia. This is the consequence of disobedience, of corporate disobedience. But then at the end, there's this like exile prophecy and hope of return, right? That shows grace even in his judgment. If they confess their iniquity and, you know, change their hearts and then I will remember my covenant. And so even this sense of repentance. And that is my cue, guys. There might be a little bit more, but that's it for Leviticus. Bye, guys. See ya. Hey, guys. Thank you so much for going on this journey with me. If you like the content, please like, subscribe, follow, and remember, there is more to life, and that is good news. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day.